It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. Rights groups say executions in Saudi Arabia have nearly doubled under the rule of King Salman and his son, the de facto ruler Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. According to a report by Reprieve and the European Saudi Organization for Human Rights, the average of executions has increased to almost 130 a year since King Salman rose to the throne in 2015. Over 1,000 death sentences have been carried out since then. According to rights groups, those executed include protesters and children. The report also details cases of torture and unfair trials. Rights groups have slammed MBS for overseeing a harsh crackdown on critics. The Western allies of Saudi Arabia are also accused of turning a blind eye to the kingdom's human rights record in favor of their own interests. Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, journalist and political commentator, joins us from London. Faisal Najim is the manager of the Canadian Defenders for Human Rights, who joins us from Toronto. Welcome to you both. Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, first over to you. The executions in Saudi Arabia has been going on for quite some time, but the fact that since the Crown Prince has come to power and the executions have increased, what does that say about how he feels about his critics in particular?
Well, since bin Salman has been in power, clearly there has been a difference in the way Saudi Arabia's actual establishment has operated. He's essentially done a power grab. I mean, he wasn't in line naturally to take over. That's not the way the Saudi establishment works. The son doesn't necessarily take over from the king. It can often be the brother or the cousin. That's the way it was. But it's a fact that bin Salman has been backed by Zionists to be their man, the one who is going to take them into the rest of the 21st century. And one of his first acts was the most heinous crime of launching a war on Yemen. And we all know that the amount of human rights violations that have gone on there. But internally, he started as he meant to go on. He incarcerated most of his relatives in a very expensive hotel, albeit, and then got them to empty their pockets. So they had repressing dissidents, repressing human rights activists, repression of independent clerics, execution of the likes of Sheikh Nimr for the simple act of speaking out for the violations against the Shia minorities. Minorities like the Sufis are also suppressed on a regular basis. And there's an entire system of religious discrimination which fills up the prisons. There's Sheikh Salman al-Auda is one such individual accused of being part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hassan Farhan al-Maliki is another one I can name. Wahid Abul Khair, who simply criticized on media the human rights injustices of the Saudis and got given 15 years in jail. Of course, the failure of the Saudis to stop their war on Yemen, to stop all these 30,000 plus prisoners of conscience which are locked up in Saudi jails without due process, without real courts, has not stopped. It's increased, and it's no doubt the Western powers are egging him on and giving him carte blanche to do this.
Well, that's the other aspect of this first, al-Najim. When you have the Western powers who are not even in a sense condemning what Saudi Arabia is doing. I mean, we've seen how they have reacted when it comes to the Saudi regime, even when there's proof that in the case of Jamal Khashoggi, that wasn't an execution. There was proof there, and yet Saudis were brought back into the fold. What are the interests of the West for not really going after Saudi Arabia the way that it should, for a regime that has executed so many people?
Yes. I mean, it's very shameful for the West to continue to support the Saudi regime, but at the end of the day, they really care about their benefits and their interests, and that is to control West Asia, as they call it, Middle East, and the resources, and to have certain puppet regimes, and to secure the Zionist regime. This is obviously the main goal of the U.S. and the British and the French and their allies. And unfortunately, they preach about human rights. They preach about international law and all these type of things that as if they're fighting for justice. But then They support the most unjust systems and a tribal regime. It's a tribal regime. It has nothing to do with democracy, what they promote and what they try to implement in their countries and have established. And the Saudi regime is totally against that. If anybody speaks out, if anybody criticizes, in the smallest way, on social media, they're arrested and they're suppressed, and sometimes they're shot. Sometimes they can't even talk to their family. Sometimes they can't even have a lawyer to represent them. They don't even have sometimes a funeral. Like Sheikh Nimr, for instance, when they killed him, they didn't even give him a place of burial and a funeral where people can even visit him. So this is the type of repressive, despotic type of regime the Saudi regime is. And it's always been arresting females, been arresting youth, very young youth, especially in the eastern province. I'm working right now on a particular case with Canadian Defenders for Human Rights. A person by the name of Hassan Mohammed Al-Rabia. This person it's a pretty much a blackmail kind of case. So if they are looking for somebody that has opposed them or protested against them, or oppose their foreign policies or whatever it is inside the country. So what they do is, if that person escaped to another country, they'll try to arrest somebody inside the country that is family members or relatives. So this person right now, all of a sudden they put in a warrant for his arrest, and he tried to run away to Morocco, and now he's we're in the process to try to put pressure on Morocco not to extradite him back to Saudi Arabia, because many of his brothers have been arrested as well. He's got a brother right now that's facing execution in Saudi Arabia. Two brothers that already have escaped Saudi Arabia and lived somewhere in West Asia, and then now one of them is in Morocco, trying to get. We're trying to see if we can help not get him extradited back to Saudi Arabia. These people are innocent people. They just protested, pretty much, some of them, and some of them didn't even protest. They just wanted to somehow put pressure. And this is the Saudi regime that you're dealing with.
All right, looking at the other aspect of this, Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, there are lots of people who, for the mere opposition points of views that have been relayed, whether it's through social media or what have you, are in jail, and again, based on this report, and that they have been prosecuted in unfair trials, etc., and they're languishing in jails. Is Saudi Arabia afraid that if it has critics, that there will be chances of the regime being threatened in any shape or form?
Of course, they fear these political voices because they're genuine voices for justice. And the Saudi Arabian establishment, the despotic regime that is there, it has never been just. It was a construct built on Zionist Western ambitions in the region. It's retained that role. It survives primarily because the oil was necessary for the West. It survived primarily because the Israelis and the Zionists in Israel needed a proxy Arab to keep the rest of the Arab satellite nations under control and not to gang up on them. Really, because the Americans also, they are, I think it's the second largest oil market for them. The Americans themselves have something like, in terms of trading partners, Saudi Arabia is one of the largest, in fact the second largest, I understand, and it's also very much in the framework of acting as a policeman or a base where American bases can go and deal with anything they like in that region. So it's a complete tool of the United States as well as Israel, as far as I would say. The US have signed trade investment framework agreements. They experiment the region. They're backed by the likes of the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. Saudi gets given all these positions, even on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. All of this is done because they have the support of the accountability on the Khashoggi murder. That's still not been resolved. In fact, the CIA even identified Salman as being involved, yet they've done nothing about it. In fact, they've washed it up. The British establishment launched a report on the finances of terrorism across the West Asia. It had a huge implication which was there within that report. That report was repressed by the government then. The UK government didn't release it then, it still hasn't released it. And meantime, of course, in Riyadh, you've got criminal courts dismissing all charges by prominent Saudi women, in fact, who stood up to shout about torture and ill treatment and whatnot, but actually the courts just simply said no, that there's no such thing. Let's not forget migrant worker abuse, which is something that migrant worker abuse, and generally exporting terrorism around that region, exporting all sorts of nasty Wahhabist doctrinal religious nightmares from Afghanistan through to the Middle East. The Saudi Arabians are basically in the business of creating torture and misery in West Asia.
Okay, thank you for that. Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, journalist and political commentator. Faisal Najim, manager of the Canadian Defender for Human Rights from Toronto. Thank you to you both. With that, we come to an end for this edition of the News Review. Thanks for tuning in.